Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune. We are here on the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. We have a 53-man roster for the Chicago Bears. We're going to pick it apart and see who got the bad news today, who stayed, and maybe got some good news. Dan, what was your biggest surprise after seeing the 53-man roster?
Well, first of all, you phrased that correctly. We have a 53-man roster. We don't have the 53-man roster. I sort of make my annual proclamation that the 53-man roster that matters is the one you go to practice with for the first day of practice in week one. So there's going to be a lot of movement here in the next few days with waiver claims and some other roster machinations with guys going to IR and things of that nature. I don't think there were many shocks in this roster, David. I think some of the most notable things, you see a guy like Trevis Gipson, draft pick from the previous regime, 2020 pick, who had showed some promise in his career, head out the door. I think that was kind of sort of foreshadowed here over the last month with the way things have gone inside the building for him, and for whatever reason couldn't earn the confidence of this coaching staff in this front office. I think obviously with a chance to talk to Matt Eberflus today, the idea that the Bears they seem like they have a priority on bringing back a veteran presence in the quarterback's room. So I think there's a push to bringing Nathan Peterman back on the practice squad if possible. He was cut today. They can also scour the waiver wire claim if they want to find a veteran presence at that position that they think makes more sense. That's obviously a lot more difficult when you're bringing in a new guy, trying to teach him a building, teach him a system. But those are the two things initially that jump out.
I have some questions about the quarterback position, but I want to start with the guys who got the bad news today and ask you about a couple of those, maybe what the rationale for cutting Kindle Vildor and Trevis Gipson. So Trevis Gipson is somebody who had a very strong preseason. I felt like in his final game last Saturday against the Bills, he showed he had a strip sack. And I think in the previous game, he looked like somebody who had played at a high level based on he was motivated by being buried on the depth chart or whatever the case. Kindle Vildor, he played a lot of football for the Bears, not necessarily going to bemoan the loss of somebody who was inconsistent and who they may have upgraded in terms of talent and replacing him. But I ask you this, Dan, if Trevis Gipson, just based on football performance during the preseason, did he make the team and was he cut for financial reasons? And if that's the case, does that contradict maybe the football reasons that were cited in cutting PJ Walker and Alex Leatherwood, guys who's, they had money that the Bears ate? Why were they not willing to do the same thing with Trevis Gipson if that indeed is the case?
So let's start with that, because Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham will meet with the media on Wednesday afternoon at House Hall. And that's one of the top topics I think we need to get to with them is just what was it that didn't allow Trevis Gipson to stay as part of the plan here? This is a guy who was obviously productive when this regime came in. He had those 7 sacks in 2021, 5 fumbles forced that year as well, which is the ball production that is a big part of the hits principle. It didn't show up last year, and he had seemed to have a pretty decent spring and had started camp pretty well. And for some reason, he fell out of favor and wasn't able to kind of earn their confidence. I don't think this is financially related for the reasons you just mentioned. They've sort of made a public declaration that money is not going to be the driving force with a lot of the decisions they made. And it clearly wasn't with PJ Walker. It clearly wasn't with Alex Leatherwood. And so it's just going to be an interesting explanation from Ryan and Ian to kind of give us a better feel for what it was that didn't make Trevis part of the plans. Kindle Vildor, I think, is a perfect example of what happens when a roster starts to get better. You've got a day 3 pick, a guy who was fine when he was called into action, was never great. Well, now you went out and you made 2 investments in draft picks with Tyreek Stevenson, who's going to start for you on open day, with Terrell Smith, who they have high hopes for. You've got Jalen Johnson. You have Kyler Gordon, who you drafted a year ago. You've got guys in Jalen Jones and Josh Blackwell who can help you on special teams. That's a casualty that happens when you're upgrading a roster. And so we wish Kindle all the best. Certainly wish Trevis all the best. I think he's going to hopefully find himself a situation that suits him better. And it'll be very interesting to monitor his progress in 2023 because he has played successful football at this level. And now it's a matter of trying to get that back out of him.
Let's look at that defensive end position, Dan. Then I count 5 defensive ends that made the initial 53 guys who maybe mild surprises. Rasheem Green, Terrell Lewis, obviously guys who had strong preseasons themselves, who were part of the new regime's finds, if you will. And then Dominic Robinson, who I think still, to me,
Yeah.
seems a little like a project, but certainly a draft pick, their first draft with the Ryan Poles regime. And then the veterans who they added via free agency outside the organization, DeMarcus Walker and Yannick Ngakoue.
Yeah, with Dom, like this is a guy that it needs to show up. He had that flashy debut as a rookie a year ago against the 49ers, and you thought, man, they really found themselves a diamond in the rough. And then the production wasn't there for the remainder of the year. It hasn't been super consistent through training camp or in preseason action when he's been out there. And so you want to see some flashes. You want to see some things to believe in as soon as September 10th when the Packers come to town. And so, look, that's a group they feel good about. DeMarcus Walker didn't practice really at all in August. And Yannick Ngakoue is trying to find his way here. So I think you're right to scratch your head a little bit with this group of in saying that it's an unknown quantity going to the starting gate of the season opener. And to some extent, so is the defensive tackle position, where two of the biggest things that absolutely killed this team in 2022 was their inability to rush the passer and their inability to stop the run. Those are two pretty big things to playing winning football. We don't know if they're going to be able to do it much better than they did a year ago. I think obviously the reason tells you it'll be better, but how much better is a total mystery.
I really do have questions about the interior of that defense still, even after 3 preseason games and seeing where they have upgraded in theory on paper. But I still think that I don't know if I have 100% trust that they are that much better able to stop the run. I want to ask one last question about the edge rushers, and I don't want to dwell on it necessarily. I get that I'm not going to change my season projection based on the fact that Trevis Gipson isn't here. But if I were to ask you to rank the most productive defensive ends in the preseason for the Bears, you wouldn't go far down the list before you'd see his name. And
right, he'd be right behind Terrell Lewis, really, on this roster.
Terrell Lewis, right, would be probably the guy who flashed the most, and then Trevis Gipson would be next. And then I wonder if they're keeping guys just because they drafted them, or they're keeping guys just because they found them. And I wonder about that sometimes.
Again, I want more clarity on this from Ryan and Ian on Wednesday. Hopefully they'll be able to provide it. Trevis is certainly not a guy that has attitude issues. He's certainly not a guy that rocks the boat inside the locker room. A hard worker, humble kid, gives you everything he has. They sang his praises as recently as this week with Ellen Williams and Matt Eberflus doing it from the dais. And so, I mean, that's it. You ask a good question. I wish I had a better answer for you today. Probably the next time we talk, I will.
Let's move on to the quarterback position, because a lot of people talking about what's going on with the Bears. It's somewhat it's a great story, kind of because it's a little unexpected. The number 2 quarterback as we sit here today is Tyson Bagent, the Division II product from Shepherd University in West Virginia. Somebody who we didn't know much about him going into preseason, and certainly he was just kind of a mystery. Now he's become right now the number 2 quarterback. Dan, they cut PJ Walker, and they still owe him some money. They guaranteed him $2 million, I believe. And they have, released Nathan Peterman with the idea of bringing him back on the practice squad. Matt Eberflus was somewhat coy. I don't want to say, but indirectly suggested that they would like to bring a veteran into that room. Do you think a guy like Trevor Siemian, who was cut by the Bengals, qualifies as a candidate to be that guy? Or do you think it's going to be someone else or no one at all?
I think it will be someone. I think it will be someone. Like I say, I think Nathan Peterman is a guy that they would like to have back on the practice squad if they don't find something better. I don't know about Trevor at this point. Obviously, he would have the experience in the system, experience with Justin, the experience with Luke that would, at least give you a reason to think about it if that's the way you wanted to go. But if you wanted to go that route, you probably would have kept him around to begin with last spring. Look, like Matt, I used the word wishy-washy when I asked him directly on Tuesday if he was ready to go to week 1 and Soldier Field against the Green Bay Packers with Tyson Bagent as his number 2 quarterback. And while he said that Tyson has put his best foot forward, they were still waiting to finalize the roster. And so he didn't say, yes, that's a declarative, undisputed number 2 quarterback. And so I'll be really interested to see kind of what direction they go in the next couple of days with that. Tyson Bagent has shown some things on tape that are really, really impressive in terms of obviously not only the timing and the rhythm and the poise, but the way he moves in the pocket, there were things against the Bills on Saturday afternoon, David, that on a second and third watch, you go, man, this is it. Like, this is some of the stuff they're trying to get Justin to do. Justin's always going to be a much more explosive athlete, a much more dynamic playmaker, better arm strength, all those things. The way Tyson Bagent can slide up in the pocket and then slide out, the way he kind of surfs that pocket, the way they talk about doing it, there are signs there that it's pretty proficient. And so you understand why they want to continue to develop that and see if there is a diamond in the rough. And it also, when we talk about trying to have a safety net beneath you in case Justin Fields doesn't become what you hope he becomes, this gives you a jump start on that a little bit. This gives you a guy in-house that you can start to take a look at, and you don't have to start, dreaming about all the draft capital you'd have to get up to get in the quarterback sweepstakes of the 2024 draft. You may be able to do what the 49ers did and say, oh, Trey Lance didn't work out. Jimmy Garoppolo didn't work out. Well, guess what? We found a diamond in the rough in Brock Purdy. And so now you have, 18 weeks from this point forward to kind of explore if that is something that's in your cards. And I think that's notable as much as anything else.
Yeah, I don't want to call it the best case scenario because that would include Justin Fields not living up to potential. But I think that your emergency plan is that ideally he is your Brock Purdy to Trey Lance. He is your Kirk Cousins to RG3.
Right.
Because Cousins going back was a 4th round pick, not expected to do much. He was the backup to RG3. And then you look at what happened with those two guys in their careers. That's way ahead of ourselves. What I did like about Bagent against the Bills in the preseason finale was his footwork. And I didn't expect that. His mobility, which I also didn't know much about, but he definitely, as confident as he is just in the huddle and at the line of scrimmage, he's not exactly shy in terms of running the football. He didn't seem like he was scared of anything. Here's the one thing, too, that I think you can get into trouble as a young quarterback when you're not scared of anything. He throws the ball with conviction, and he throws the ball before receivers make the break. He throws guys open, or he throws the ball where they should be. You've got to have communication 100% with the receivers, and you have to have that innate sense of where they're going to go to be right, and he's going to be wrong. And I think sometimes we saw it maybe against the Bills. I wonder if that's going to get in the way. Even though you like his confidence, you wonder he's got to find a balance there between knowing exactly what's going to happen and throwing the ball where he wants it.
What's your over-under on when the city of Chicago starts calling for Tyson Bagent to be the starter? Halloween?
It depends on how effective Justin Fields is.
I joke, but then again, I don't, right?
We know Chicago. Halloween's wishful thinking if Justin Fields starts 1-3 and he's below 60% completion percentage. There will be people clamoring for the backup quarterback who was always the most popular bear in town.
Right. And so one of the other things from Saturday that I liked about Tyson Bagent is I actually gave him an out to kind of wiggle out of the interception he threw because of what happened on the play where you've got kind of a rub route concept and you're expecting the defender on the slot receiver to kind of follow your guy out to the flat. And instead he takes depth and runs into the guy that pre-snap you're expecting to throw the football to. So Tyson Bagent gets locked and loaded to throw the ball to Darius Fountain. And then Darius Fountain runs into the defensive back that's covering Simba Webster, and the ball gets easily intercepted. Meanwhile, Simba Webster is wide open in the right flat. And I said, is that just a case where, you can't really expect that collision to happen. And it's just one of those fluky things. And he said, no, like I have to see that collision coming and adjust accordingly and understand that my flat route receiver, in this case, Simba Webster, is wide open and get the ball to him. And so just that understanding of what went wrong and what his ownership and responsibility in it was impressive to me as well. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because it'll create too much just hubbub in terms of how this relates to Justin. But it relates to Tyson Bagent because they felt confident enough to let a guy that they paid, $2 million in guaranteed money in March and thought was going to be their veteran backup in the room go. And if Tyson Bagent doesn't perform like he did in the month of August, they may be sitting there with PJ Walker on their roster and a bottle of Excedrin by the nightstand, right. Going, what did we just do? And now they at least give themselves the conviction that they've got another option and that they can own that mistake. I said 2 weeks ago that one of the things I was interested to see is whether Ryan Poles would have that in him to admit a mistake like that, because that the PJ Walker signing goes as a loss in his column. There's no question about it. No matter what Tyson Bagent did, you swung and you missed on a backup in a year it's pretty pivotal to have someone in that room. So that's another little notable footnote on this whole conversation.
You mentioned Darius Fountain. He was one of the receivers that was let go and released. You also Simba Webster, somebody who had his moments during training camp. I think those are just people who were really paying close attention, and that is our audience of people who are paying very close attention. They know the names when we say them, and guys who may have flashed during training camp. A couple other names getting back to the roster decisions, and I think guys who you can envision being part of the 16-man practice squad.
Right.
Micah Baskerville had a very strong preseason, and he was one of the players that did not make the initial 53. Travis Bell, the 7th-round draft pick from Kennesaw State, who is a very easy guy to pull for and to like as well, and has had his share of moments. Those are two guys whose names may have stood out, Dan, to me in terms of young players that look promising and may be still part of the organization. Anyone out to you?
Super point there, because when I got in the league, covering this league, 12 years ago, it was an 8-man practice squad, and then it was a 10-man practice squad, and now it's ballooned to a 16-man practice squad. And the Bears, by the way, will have a 17-man practice squad most likely this season, because they get an exemption for Roy Mbedeka, who's part of the International Pathway Player Program, that gives him an opportunity to continue developing with this special exemption. There are going to be a lot of guys that are on this cut list today that are back at practice on Thursday afternoon at Halas Hall. Travis Bell, most likely one of them. Baskerville is a guy they certainly will have back on the practice squad. I wouldn't be shocked if somehow someone decided to put in a claim for him. That'll be one worth keeping an eye on, because he flashed. And there are people around the league and people who observe it closely that said, man, like, this dude's got it instinctually. So that's one to keep an eye on. Look, I know we always kind of overestimate the ability to get guys through waivers, but that's the one that I'm most curious to see if there's any risk in losing him because he is on waivers. But other than that, you mentioned Webster and Fountain and these guys and Peterman, all candidates to be back here again on Thursday. And so again, like I always say, like next Wednesday or next Tuesday, let's take a look at that 53 plus 17. And then we've got our full analysis of what the Bears look like. Right now, a lot of things are still very fluid.
Our audience obviously would appreciate your writing. So in the ChicagoTribune.com, people want to check out your story on Roy Mbedeka. That was terrific. The long journey he took to get to the Bears and Halas Hall. And I'm glad he's staying because of the exemption, because that was terrific. And he seems like a real engaging guy.
The super cool guy to talk to. And I talked to him a couple different times throughout camp in the preseason, and then had to go to his locker after a preseason game on Saturday where he was one of 2 players that were healthy and not a starter and didn't play. He just paced the sidelines for that entire 3 hours against the Bills. And look, 6'9", 320 with footwork and movement skills that make your eyes pop. There is a ton of developmental work to be done with this kid. He, just started playing football seriously a few years ago, doing drills with people in Nigeria via YouTube videos that were just basic. Here's how you block a defensive player, and not like this is what you do with scheme, and this is how how you defend a bull rush, or this is how you defend a cross chop. All those things. So there is a raw block of clay here that the Bears will get another 4 months to try to continue molding and see if he's got a future here. It's a cool story for a dude that was discovered by O.C. Umenyora's Uprise camp, in Africa, a guy who came from Nigeria, won a Super Bowl with the Giants, and understands that there's some fertile ground in those parts of the world for athletes, and guys that might need to be discovered. This guy's one of them.
2 linebackers who I thought might have a shot, especially to help the Bears on special teams, DeMarcus Gates and Michael Walker, the former Falcon who joined the team late and he was cut by the Falcons. They were both on the initial cut list. I wonder, do you think that either one of those guys may come back to Halas, or will they be landing with other teams?
Good question on Walker. I always thought that his arrival a couple weeks ago was just to get you through a preseason in which all your linebackers were hurt. They had so many injuries at the position throughout the month that you needed guys to play in preseason games, and they found a guy that was experienced and capable of doing that. It also tells you that they believe that Dylan Cole is going to be 100% healthy for the regular season. He makes the 53-man roster. He's one of those guys, along with Travis Homer, who are core special teams guys, the heartbeat of those 4 phases on special teams. And so, those guys will make it. We'll see what happens with Walker. Gates, he was in and out last year, definite candidate for the practice squad. And then look, the Bears have the number one claim in the waiver wire. And so every single player that's cut by every single other team in the league now is a player that the Bears can pick off the shelf and say, we want to take a look at that guy. Obviously you have to get rid of somebody currently on your 53-man roster to do that. We talked a ton a year ago about how they made 6 waiver claims. And then we emphasized this week that name me those 6 waiver claim guys. The only guy still around is Josh Blackwell, right? So 5 of those 6 didn't work out. Alex Leatherwood caused a lot of excitement. Former first-round pick. He's claimed on waivers. And then today, when Eberflus was given a chance to kind of explain why it didn't work here, just kind of sidestepped it and played dodgeball. And Alex Leatherwood leaves the building without having made much of an impression on anyone whatsoever. So
you mentioned Travis Homer, the free agent signing. That is going to be a special teams contributor and probably standout if it goes well. He makes the team. Treston Ebner does not. A 2022 draft pick, I believe. He's on concussion protocol, I think, Dan. Is that not the case because he has the injury designation? What's his future hold?
Yeah, so they put him with that injury designation, and so what happens now is if he does clear waivers, which is expected to, he will revert to IR here now when the regular season begins, and then it's a matter of what you do with him from there. So he should still be around for a little while, and you hope you get him healthy, first and foremost. But he's a numbers casualty in a running backs room that's pretty deep. I said a couple weeks ago I didn't know if they'd keep 5. The closer we got to cut down day, it seemed pretty obvious that they were going to keep the 5. And they feel really good about those 3 that are going to run the ball, between the complementary skill sets of Herbert, of Foreman, of Roschon Johnson. And then obviously you have your fullback in Blazing Game. And then a guy in Travis Homer who does a lot for you in a lot of different ways that most people don't notice.
We make so much about the draft picks by Ryan Poles. Each and every one gets studied and scrutinized. I mentioned Travis Bell getting released. Also, Kendall Williamson, a draft pick this year. He's probably a candidate to come back. Did he show much in camp that you remember?
2 7th rounders that almost certainly will get their practice squad jobs by the end of the week. Kendall Williamson, it looked like there's instincts there. There's athleticism there. There's something to work with. They feel better. Look, when we walked into training camp, I told you one of the biggest depth questions I had on this roster was at safety. And I asked you to name their backups at safety and we couldn't get there. Well, now we go to week 1 and their backups are Elijah Hicks and AJ Thomas. And so that's what you're working with. The belief inside the building is that Eddie Jackson and Jaquan Brisker will be more than ready to start week 1 against the Packers. But my question is, okay, what happens the next time one or both of those guys go down? Where's your depth? Well, there it is. That's Hicks and Thomas.
Natural question as a follow-up. Deion Bush was a casualty of the Chiefs purge on their roster. He's a former Bear. He knows the building and he's got some experience. Would he might be a guy who they look at on the waiver wire?
Previous regime guy. So I don't think that he's going to fit with this particular group. But yeah, we'll see where they go. Look, again, so many hundreds of players are being informed of their release today. And like I asked Matt Eberflus this afternoon what the process is like inside the building and trying to sift through all these waiver claims. And I said, is it frantic during these, 24 hours? He said, nope, it's organized, it's detailed, it's methodical. And so they have their processes down where Ryan and Ian and that staff get all their guys together. They have head coach and coordinators watch some of the film and they try to figure out, okay, who are our priorities? It's certainly beneficial when you can have the first crack at everyone with that number 1 waiver claim. And so you don't have to do as much guesswork on, is this guy going to get claimed by somebody ahead of us in the waiver claim order, or do we have him? And at this point, they'll get a chance to swing at a lot of guys if they so desire.
Ace producer Adam Sadzinski informs us that Trevis Gipson tweeted out that he, quote, never requested a trade, as was reported that he was given permission to seek one, or maybe he requested one. Whatever the case, it never made sense to me why somebody would trade for a guy who was likely facing, his roster cut at 3 p.m. on Tuesday. So if Trevis Gipson never requested a trade, the Bears seemingly were never close to dealing him.
I will say this with full sincerity. Trevis has been one of my favorite guys in that locker room over the last 3 years. Tremendous to talk to, very introspective, very humble, very grounded. I was disappointed on Saturday afternoon when he snuck out of the locker room before reporters were allowed in, because if you wanted to set that record straight on Saturday afternoon, you had an opportunity to set that record straight on Saturday afternoon. And he ducked out and wasn't there to take questions on this. So the tweet doesn't do much for me a couple days later. And I say that with all due respect to Trevis, who again has been one of my favorite guys in that building for a few years now. And so we'll see where he goes. And pretty interesting that's surfacing this afternoon.
So this comes after all the roster cuts, the news on Monday night, late Monday night, that the Bears made a trade to beef up their depth on the offensive line. Matt Feeney is a guard.
Dan Feeney.
I'm sorry, Dan Feeney. Dan Feeney is a guard with the Miami Dolphins, a free agent, played with the Jets and spent 4 years with the Chargers before that. The pride of Sandberg High School from Orland Park. He's a local guy. I've heard from people who know him already. His family's excited. Fans are excited. Friends are excited. He's coming back. What role do you expect Dan Feeney to play on the Bears offensive line?
I think I saw a video circulating on social media where he was chugging beers at an Islanders game, on the Jumbotron camera. So you bring that to the offensive line room, and you obviously got a personality there. Look, they're reshuffling this offensive line on the interior in particular, David, right now because of all the injuries that added up in the month of August. Teven Jenkins' return is uncertain. Matt Eberflus, when he calls a guy week to week, you may as well put him in an ambulance and send him to long-term care, right? Like, because that's how much it takes to get off the day-to-day list for him. And so you have to figure out answers on the interior offensive line. Nate Davis, Cody Whitehair. Well, now Dan Feeney comes in, and as Matt described it on Tuesday afternoon, you've got a guy who is like a good swing tackle because he can play center for you. He can play either guard spot for you, and you've got a reliable backup who, if called upon to start, has that experience, is reliable enough, and as a coaching staff gives you some of that peace of mind that if needed, he's going to plug in there and know what to do and how to do it.
So apparently depth is important on the offensive line because of the injuries. Matt Eberflus clarified on Tuesday that the only player who might not be available for week 1 is Teven Jenkins. So if that's the case, it means Nate Davis ideally will be your right guard and Cody Whitehair will be available. Your left guard is or maybe Cody Whitehair is the left guard and Lucas Patrick is the center. However it shakes out, the good news would be also Darnell Wright is presumably going to start week 1 against the Packers. Are you surprised by any of the injury news you got? Because you go both sides of the ball and you have to be encouraged that your guys are getting healthy.
Well, again, this is eye test stuff for me, and I need to go out to practice the rest of this week and at the start of next week and see what those guys look like. Noah Sewell, a guy who left Saturday's preseason game with what appeared to be a groin injury. Is he going to be ready for week 1? I'm not sure. He's on the day-to-day list. We'll see what that injury report looks like officially a week from now. On the Wednesday of week 1, we'll see before that what some of these guys look like and what their involvement is in practice on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Monday. And we'll be able to give you a better look at things. Look, like they need to stay healthy. Nate Davis is the head scratcher of the month, really, on a lot of levels because he didn't practice much at all. And Eberflus said on Tuesday afternoon that, look, like I faced him in the division in the AFC South for a few years, and I know what he's like when he's healthy, and I expect him to be so when the regular season arrives. Okay, let's see it, and then we'll check that box. I'm not as ready to check it as they seem to be publicly. That offensive line's got to get solidified quickly. We know what's at stake for Justin. We know what's at stake in the first month of the season for Justin, because again, this isn't just an opener against some random opponent. This is the Packers at 3:25 at Soldier Field to open your season with the whole world looking to overreact one way or another to what happens that afternoon. So you better be ready to be crisp, efficient, and show some things that give people the impression that your offense is ready to roll for an 18-week ride. Is there anything else in regard to the 53-man roster, the decisions that were made, the battles that were won or lost that we've overlooked or haven't touched on? Well, like at the receiver position, we always talk about, is Velus Jones in jeopardy? Well, he's not. He's here. They're going to need to try to bring out the best in him in his second season in the league. Equanimeous St. Brown sticks around because of his reliability as a blocker. And again, we'll see how many of the guys on the current 53 are still here on Monday after all these waiver claims go down and all the reshuffling goes down and everything that happens. So that would be one that I would mention. And I think otherwise we've covered it pretty thoroughly.
So when you look at the receiving room and you look at the wide receiver depth and the quality of the receiving core, I think that opens the door to have you respond to the wide receiver rumor of the week, which I know triggered you a little bit on Monday, and all Bears fans everywhere saw, and it made very little sense to me, but I'll let you take it from there.
Well, look, I'm going to try to find the origins of this just so I can do this justification, David. But the way that this thing got legs, like the information sewer that is social media these days, it's just mystifying. I know you're an old school reporter and you like to have things verified before you take one wave of speculation and turn it into 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 waves of
Thank you.
speculation.
Yes.
I
Still that
agree.
guy.
I
Yeah.
agree with that approach, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a pretty healthy approach to take in this business. Well, there's a tweet 9:16 a.m. on Monday that said there's already been plenty of trade activity across the NFL, but we're still about 30 hours from the cut down deadline. Surprise trade candidates include Bears wide receiver Darnell Mooney, Lions edge James Houston the fourth. Well, that's from at PFF _ Brad Spielberg from Pro Football Focus. And my first reaction to that was, okay, what? And it links to an article that hedged a lot. There was a lot of, I don't think this is going to happen and it probably won't happen, but what if it did? And all of a sudden you've got the entire world on Twitter talking about Darnell Mooney being traded. And then you have other people taking it to the next level and going, well, here's why Darnell Mooney's unhappy. Well, none of these things are true. The Bears were never thinking about trading Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney was never unhappy. There's none of this stuff is founded in reality. And so it's an exercise for audience members to like walk through the step-by-step process, which is really hard to do when your timeline is flooding at you like an open faucet. But like, number one, if the Bears were going to trade Darnell Mooney and wanted to dangle him, most likely they would use an Adam Schefter, an Ian Rappaport, a Tom Pelissero to get that word out there, to dangle that out there. You get someone in the national media with connections everywhere to put it out there, and then people will start calling out it. It's usually not coming from PFF _ Brad. If that were the case, and you're entering a year where you need to get a decision on your starting quarterback, Justin Fields, and you want to see everything you can about who he is, and you want to give him no excuses, as the Take North podcast has said a bunch of times. And your entire mission in this offseason was getting him protection and getting him weapons. Why on earth, on the eve of the regular season, would you subtract a weapon from your receiving core, which is already beat up with Chase Claypool down? Why on earth would you subtract a guy who has notable chemistry with Justin Fields on the field? Why on earth would you subtract a guy who's one of Justin Fields' best friends in the building at a time like this? So none of it ever made sense. Okay. So when I saw it, threw it in the trash immediately, didn't think twice about it. And then you just start seeing the reaction to it. And then the reaction to the reaction. And you see how these things get legs and you go, boy, this could be a societal problem at large, not in relation to the Mooney trade, but just in terms of the way information spreads and false information takes on a life of its own. And then false information takes on a new life of false information, which then creates more false information. And then before you know it, all we're doing is drinking from a false information faucet. So yes, it bothered me. I'm a little passionate about this, and I'm sorry I got worked up there, but your reaction to the whole thing.
I'm glad you did, because as it came up this morning on Tuesday morning on the Mully and Haugh show, I just deemed it PFF, Pro Football Foolish, because it made no sense to me.
Pro Football Fabrication.
Yeah, that's even better. I'm going to use that tomorrow, Dan, but I'll give you credit. Both things apply, because it's one of those things that qualifies under the category of clickbait. Have a lot of respect for Brad. They do a really good job in a lot of different areas, but I don't think that trade speculation necessarily is one of those, especially in this case.
I don't know if Studs has got the sound clip ready, but that's a perfect Zach Pickens candidate for what you're doing, man.
What you doing,
man?
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. All right, let's do it again, Studs.
Hey, what you doing, man?
All right, what you doing, man? That's a good one. All right, so Dan, last thing I want to get your impression, because Mully and I had an interesting conversation too, and again, this is in the context of just kind of understanding how the NFL works, or thinking that we do. The Trey Lance situation, I think, can be a cautionary tale. A year ago, he was preparing to start the season against the Bears, and he came into Soldier Field as the quarterback of the future for the San Francisco 49ers. Suffers a broken ankle on September 18th, I think week 3 or week 2. He misses the season, and he was maybe rushed to the field. But a year after he was the starter of the quarterback of the future, he is now on his second team, traded after they gave up on him, essentially, in San Francisco, after they gave up so much to get him in the draft. He was drafted well ahead of Justin Fields, the third quarterback taken in the 2021 draft. And I think that when you talk about, and we talk about, the no excuses tour. That's kind of what we're talking about. Life comes at you fast in the NFL. Justin Fields has a sense of urgency that is arriving very quickly. September 10th, it is here. The beginning of that season that will dictate his future, because you don't want to be in a year from now wondering wonder what Justin Fields is going to be like as whatever shape his career takes. But I do think that just it should remind everyone in Chicago how temporary this kind of opportunity can be,
Oh yeah.
and how important this season is.
2019 is all you need to revisit to understand just how quickly that trapdoor can open up beneath you and everything goes in the direction that you didn't think it was going in. The Bears went from Super Bowl hopefuls on the Thursday night of week 1 of 2019 to, oh no, we're in free fall by November 1st. And that's a startling 2-month transition and evolution there. And so look, like there's a lot ahead here and there's a lot to develop. And Luke Getsy said something in one of the meetings that was shown on the Bears 1920 football drive program, where he was talking to his players about understanding how to ride that roller coaster and do so with grace and a steel stomach. And he said, you have to do it with an attitude of, we got this bleep, And so like Justin is at the forefront of that. He's got to weather the storm. I'm glad you asked this question because I get a lot of questions on social media and I don't like answering them on social media because the discussion is longer about how does Justin's camp in 2023 compare to some of the struggles we saw from Mitch's camp in 2019 that for me were a warning sign of, like this isn't fluid. The two differences for me are number one, the expectations of what that season was going to be are far different. That team was a Super Bowl hopeful team, and the pressure of having to live up to that so quickly mounted. And it mounted throughout that summer. It mounted throughout that training camp. It mounted into that first week of the regular season when they laid an egg and lost to the Packers 10-3 at home. And by the way, don't forget, in that game, the Bears had the ball down 10-3 with a chance to go tie it up, and the entire stadium knew the game was over. And that told you how that game had gone that day. And Mitch ended up throwing an interception in the end zone to Adrian Amos. So the pressure was different. Justin's mental fortitude is different than Mitch's was. He's just sturdier in terms of the psyche and the ability to handle struggle and failure.
Star quality.
And I always said with Mitch, like, and it's not like I mean, it's a criticism for sure, but it's something I can relate to. He struggled with struggling, and that was one of his fatal flaws is he just could never kind of just like steady himself. And it became a problem. Justin's not going to have those problems. Now, some of the inconsistency that was shown through training camp is worrisome. Again, I counted 18 interceptions in 11 and 11 and 7 on 7 periods from the start of training camp until the end of last week. And that has to get cleaned up. I'm going to have something for ChicagoTribune.com next week that we're going to talk about at length on this show, which is setting realistic statistical goals for Justin Fields in 2023. It's an awesome exercise. I'm almost done with it. You're going to be really intrigued to see what the results are because I think it'll give you kind of a level barometer of what we're aiming for and where the bullseye's at. The other thing I would say, and I'm curious what you think of this, because the Bears opted to play Justin Fields in that preseason finale the other day, and they were going to give him 10 to 15 snaps, and then he took a hit on his 13th snap and they pulled the plug. And look, I'm not up in arms about this. I'm not outraged. It was an interesting decision to me because of where they took him out of the game at. It was 1st and goal at the 9, and all camp long, you've talked about the need to get him a lot of situational work. Well, now here you had at most 3 plays from inside the 10 left to run, and they got so spooked by the hit that he took from Ed Oliver that they yanked him out of the game right away and said, Tyson, go finish this drive off. And I wondered what you thought of that decision, because it was sort of an interesting decision in a moment where you're trying to squeeze every last ounce of development out of the guy at the end of the preseason. Again, I have no problems with the decision they made. I just wonder if it was a little too panicky.
I never worry about guys. I shouldn't say never. I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest. I think that you should play guys and see things through. I thought that was an overreaction by Matt Eberflus. They could justify the snap count, and well, I would have let him finish the drive. I would have let him, go out with the positive, try to end on a good note. I also am not going to overreact to the fact that he only had 20 snaps. Either way, Dan, I think that we end this preseason with questions that remain about Justin Fields, the passer. And I think there are probably more questions than people really want to acknowledge or feel comfortable with. They could all be erased with a 275-yard passing performance
Yeah.
against the Packers with 3 touchdowns and 1 interception. That would be terrific. But I don't think that we've seen enough in preseason. So I think that when he left the game, he left some people, some of us, kind of wanting more and unsatisfied with the progress that we have seen in a very small sample size. So yeah, I'm with you a little bit. There was a bit of a scare, kind of hold your breath moment when Oliver hit him and he went down, but he's not fragile. I don't think you can overreact too much to some things like that. And I think sometimes NFL coaches do. Josh Allen looked the part. That's the kind of performance that you want to see from a quarterback who has that kind of star potential.
Yeah, I thought it in live action. I thought it again when I rewatched it. Just the ability to go down the field and lead a touchdown drive and do so with 3 third-down conversions that were just high-level NFL quarterback stuff. That's worth watching if you want to see what the jump Justin needs to take is. Looked like the hit that Oliver put on him. Eberflus was pretty clear after the game that Fields didn't do his job in terms of drifting back enough to get rid of that screen pass and take himself out of harm's way. And so that's another lesson you've got to learn as a young quarterback. Like, don't take that hit. This is a screenplay that the rush is coming, drift and get yourself out of harm's way. So we're not worrying about bruised ribs or a broken wrist or whatever it may be. This is going to be a fascinating journey for Justin. We're going to hear from him a lot more in the next week or so. I'm hoping to get him myself here in the next couple of days, and we'll have some of that audio there. It'll be fascinating to cross this bridge and see where it leads us.
So there's a lot to look forward to the rest of the week. We're going to hear from Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham. We're going to look at who else the Bears might add to the 53, who they might subtract along the way. And we'll be back here later this week on the Take the North podcast to break it all down. Dan, we leave anything out?
I'm giving one last thing, a public apology from me to Patrick Finley of the Chicago Sun-Times, who I rode pretty hard when he was going all in on a Tyson Bagent feature at rookie minicamp and into the start of OTAs. And I really chided him in the media room and said, Pat, don't you realize that they need to have some bodies in the room to play the preseason games in August when they take Justin out and they're going to need a guy to just oversee preseason games. Never did I imagine it was going to end with Tyson Bagent being the second quarterback on the roster on roster cutdown day. So I will own my mistakes, just as I owned my miss on Anthony Miller. I will own my early miss on Tyson Bagent in the spring, and I will apologize to Pat for giving him so much grief for putting in the time to do that back in the spring. And so that's my final word.
Welcome to the Bagency, Dan. It's a very fun place to be, and that is Special Bagent 17 to you.
No doubt. And let's see where he goes from here. He may change his number. Who knows?
No change the number. He's got to keep the number. They've already put it on their Twitter feed. He's all over the place. Special Bagent 17.
Yeah.
Love the story. And we'll be back to talk more Tyson Bagent, more about whoever else they add, but we'll be back later in the week to talk more about the Bears and what's ahead. So thanks for listening today on the Take the North podcast. You can get it on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch us on the 670 Scores YouTube page. We'll be back next time. Thanks for listening.
Great talk. See you out there.